Okay, so I want to finish the story of Thanksgiving. So 1621, you have, William Bradford, and you have Pilgrims, Miles Standish, right, the great captain, Miles Standish. You have Chief Massasoit, the Wampanoags, also known as the Pokanoket. So the Pokanoket natives, Wampanoags. Most Americans don't know about this. They don't even know what Wampanoag, what the fuck is a Wampanoag, right? So I want to finish that story. What happened? 1621, they had this 3-day feast. It wasn't Thanksgiving. It was a land deal and a military alliance. It was a spontaneous sort of festival. No declaration of thanks was given. There was no prayers. There was lots of merrymaking. It wasn't a tradition. Dozens of Thanksgivings were declared before and after 1621, but 1621 definitely wasn't a day of Thanksgiving. It wasn't, okay? So it's the whole thing's a fucking lie. It's a fucking lie. But that's all right. It's not okay, really. But I don't know. What do you do? What do you do when most people believe a fucking lie, right? Mark Twain says that the lie can encircle the globe before the truth even gets a chance to put its pants on. So Native Americans have been on this American continent for about 10,000 years. So for about 10,000 years or more, Native Americans have been here. I want to mention quickly, white apologists, they'll say, oh, it wasn't a genocide. It wasn't a genocide because of the diseases. Right? Well, it was a genocide because the diseases were gonorrhea and syphilis. Those are sexually transmitted diseases. So sexually transmitted diseases, how would anybody get that? Through rape. Okay, so genocide, murder, rape, that's how the diseases were spread. So, to just be like, oh, they died of disease, like, oh, they just died of disease, we don't know what happened. Get the fuck out of here. The disease was a type of biological warfare. It was spread through rape and, murder, genocide. These are part of the culture of the invading Europeans. I want to make a quick correction. The Plymouth colony ended in 1691. I mentioned that they only lasted for 30 years. They actually lasted for 70 years. They did combine with, the other ones. They combined with, I didn't even see what my hair looks like. That's all right. But they combined with the Massachusetts Bay Colony. So the Massachusetts Bay Colony absorbed the Plymouth colony. So the Plymouth colony did fail, but for a long time they were succeeding. They were a huge part of King Philip's War, even though they had nothing to do whatsoever with the Mystic Massacre. The Mystic Massacre was John Winthrop and John Mason, and I'm not even for sure if the Plymouth colony was there. They was going to send troops, but they come several weeks later. So anyways, all right, so 1621, the first so-called Thanksgiving was said to have happened, but then by 1676, the Plymouth Bay Colony, even though it was a failure, it lasted longer than the Wampanoags. That's Chapter 2. Chapter 1 is, hey, they had this nice big feast. The Wampanoags, the Pilgrims, were going to be allies, and everything was going to be wonderful. But just 55 years later, the settlers of New England would wipe out all the original Thanksgiving Indians. The Thanksgiving Indians would declare war against them, and they would, just slaughter them, eventually killing their leader, which was the son of Chief Massasoit. They killed his first son, they killed his second son, and then they put his head on a pike. They ripped his body to shred, quartered it, hung it up in the trees, cut off his right hand, give it to the guy who had shot Metacomet, and then put his head on a pike and put it in the middle of town for everybody to look at and to, be scared of and be like, oh shit, look at them, those are some crazy bastards. And, for 20 years, Metacomet's head stayed on a pike. So Massasoit Usamequin was never permitted the Pokanet to convert to Christianity. So this is Massasoit, the first one. Usamequin is his actual name. Massasoit is the title. He never permitted the Pokanoket to convert to Christianity, and with great diplomatic skill, he managed to keep those efforts all right. They were good allies. They never converted over to their religion, kept, hold of their own culture. The Pokanoket, that's just a synonym for Wampanoag. The Pokanoket tribe was the headship tribe of many tribes that make up the Wampanoag Nation, which at times referred to as the Pokanoket Nation or the Pokanoket Confederacy. When the Italian captain Giovanni de Verrazzano sailed into Narragansett Bay in 1524, natives, most likely Pokanokets, appeared on the shores. The navigators recorded latitude of 41 degrees, 41 feet maybe north, corresponds to Mount Hope Bay, where the seat of the Pokanoket is located. Verrazzano wrote of these Rhode Island natives whom he encountered. These people are the most beautiful and have the most civil customs we have found on this voyage. So in 1524, 100 years before the Pilgrims had actually landed on the island, when they talked about the Wampanoags, they said that the Wampanoags were the most beautiful and they had the most civil customs that they found on the village. So not only are they gorgeous, but they're, they got good manners and they were decent people. I read actually, there's this one book that I have about captured, white people who were captured by the Native Americans, and it turns out that most of the people who were captured, the white people who were captured by Native Americans, never got raped. So whereas the English were raping people and spreading their gonorrhea and syphilis amongst everybody, the Native Americans never raped even their prisoners, even their female prisoners. So they still respected the women, to the point where even though it was war and there was prisoners, there wasn't rape. They weren't like De Soto, they weren't like Columbus, they weren't like that Cortez, which is some of the most barbaric, fucking dickheads ever made, ever fucking created in the world. So the Wampanoag means Easterners, literally people of the dawn. So the Wampanoag were beautiful, great manners, people of the dawn. The Wampanoags was a good tribe. The Patuxent was part of the Wampanoags. Patuxent was Squanto, and the Patuxent Lands is where the Plymouth colony eventually established itself. So this is just to, we should talk about who the Wampanoag people are. So the Wampanoag people, they believed in a matrilineal system. That's where women controlled the property, in this case the home and its belongings, as well as some rights to plots within the communal land, and hereditary status was passed through the maternal line. They were also matrifocal. When a young couple married, they lived with the woman's family. Women elders could approve selection of chiefs or sachems, although males had most of the political roles for relations with other bands and tribes, as well as warfare. Women with claims to specific plots of land used for farming or hunting passed those claims to their female descendants, regardless of their marital status. So they're a matriarchal society. They were primarily run by women. The chiefs were chosen by women. The males and the people who would get married would live with the mother. The mother, when they would die, they would pass the land on to their daughters, regardless if they had been married or not. So, when a man married a woman, then the man would live in with the woman's family. Well, this is the opposite, right? There was a huge culture clash when it comes to the Pilgrims and the Native Americans. And Native Americans actually, women would work in the fields, and then they were more hunters. And so when they saw that some of the Pilgrim women were, that the Pilgrim men were doing outside work, they were kind of like, why y'all doing women's work? What's up with that? So there's actually, I think that's a good analysis to see the gender roles of the different society. But overall, they're a matrilineal society. So we're a patriarchal society. The Pilgrims were a patriarchal society, whereas the Wampanoags were matrilineal. Roger Williams, he said that the single fornication, they count no sin. So if there's no marriage and they have sex, once or so, they don't think, they don't frown upon that, they don't look down on that. But they did have marriage, where they would solemnize by consent of parents and public approbation. So once they would have a public ceremony and the consent of the parents would agree to it, have a big public ceremony, then there was a marriage. Once they were married, then they wouldn't even be, there was no adultery, there would be no infidelity, they wouldn't have sex outside the marriage. So, that's another similarity that's, I don't know, I guess these are supposed to be savages, right? Savages who aren't raping, spreading their syphilis and their gonorrhea everywhere, and when they get married, they believed in a little bit of premarital sex, but if that was your woman and you had a ceremony and your parents and everybody got together, then that was who you were with. So, that doesn't sound very savage-like to me. The basic dress for men was the breech clout, a length of deerskin looped over a belt and back and in front. Women wore deerskin wraparound skirts, deerskin leggings, and fur capes made from deer, beaver, otter, and bear skins gave protection during the colder seasons, and deerskin moccasins were worn on the feet. So, both men and women usually braided their hair, and a single feather was often worn in the back of the hair by men. Squanto was originally from the village of Patuxent and a member of the Pokanoket Nation. Patuxent once stood where the Pilgrims built Plymouth. William Bradford died in 1657. Chief Massasoit died around 1660. So both of these, the first Pilgrim and the first Wampanoag leader, chief, governors, they died about the same time. And Massasoit was succeeded by his son, Wamsutta, not P, just Wamsutta. And then he became king. But there was an uneasy peace after that first generation of Native Americans and Pilgrims had achieved. They quickly deteriorated after Bradford and Massasoit had died. So unfortunately, there was this great alliance. They had this supposed nice Thanksgiving dinner, but eventually, right, they're going to wipe them all out. 55 years later, the Pilgrims, the Puritans, the New England colonists are going to wipe out the Wampanoag people. They're going to wipe them the fuck out. They're going to murder them. They're going to kill them. So great Thanksgiving, right? Chapter 1, have a nice big fucking Thanksgiving meal. Chapter 2, kill everybody. Well, we don't seem to talk about Chapter 2. It almost seems like we don't even mention it. Massasoit, Usab, Mequin's children. He wound up having 5 children. The first child was Muanam, also Wamsutta, who the English called Alexander, King Alexander. He was born around 1621, shortly after the Pilgrims arrived in the Mayflower. Then you have Po Metacomet, also known as Metacomet or Metacom. He was known as King Philip by the English. A third son Canuchu. 2 daughters, one named Amy, and then one name who history fails to remember. So he had 5 kids, right? Wamsutta was the oldest, Metacomet was the second, and then San Canuchu was the third, and then 2 daughters, right? One named Amy, so he had a daughter named Amy, and Alexander and Philip, and then Son Canuchu. So Son Canuchu probably felt a little out of place, right, with Philip and Alexander and Amy. Depending on if they use their English names or if they use their Native American names. Massasoit Samiquin's eldest son, Wamsutta, King Alexander, becomes the great leader of the Pokanoket on the death of his father. So once he dies, then the women of the culture chose him to succeed his father. After the death of Massasoit, Wamsutta Metacomet succeeded him in 1662. Unfortunately, Wamsutta only got to be the guy for 2 years, the man for 2 years, the chief for 2 years, because the colonists would kill him. They would poison him. And who were they poisoned by? Josiah Winslow. Now, Josiah Winslow was the first native-born governor of an American colony. He was born in America and then becomes the governor of, the same colony that his dad was governor of, the Plymouth Bay Colony, or the Plymouth Colony. His father was Edward Winslow. Edward Winslow was the person who actually wrote about the Thanksgiving meal. He was there, and it's by his account that we know, just a little bit of information that we know about Thanksgiving today was by Edward Winslow. Josiah Winslow is his son, and Susanna White is his mother. So Josiah Winslow is the son of the Mayflower passengers, Edward and Susanna White Winslow. Edward Winslow was the man who wrote about Thanksgiving dinner. Josiah Winslow was wealthy and Harvard-educated, a distinguished member of the second generation. Josiah Winslow did not continue his father's good relationship with the natives. Josiah Winslow acquired lands by dubious methods. Josiah Winslow's high-handed treatment of Wamsutta King Alexander earned him the hatred of the Pokanoket Wampanoag leader Metacom. For good reason. He killed his fucking brother, right? You kill my brother, fuck you. In 1660, Massasoit dies. 1662, King Alexander also dies, murdered, poisoned to death by Josiah Winslow. So here's the story. Here's what happens, right? You have King Alexander. Wamsutta becomes the chief of the Wampanoag. The English weren't happy about this. They felt he was too self-confident. He was too self-confident. He was too cocky. He's too arrogant. Fuck him, right? Well, that's not a good reason to hate somebody. After Massasoit's death, Wamsutta becomes the chief, becoming the leader of all the Native American tribes between the Charles River in Massachusetts and Narragansett Bay in Rhode Island, including the tribes in eastern Rhode Island and eastern Massachusetts. As a result of the collapse of the fur trade, he substantially increased the power of the Wampanoags by selling land to colonists, and not just to the Plymouth Bay colonists, but also to the Connecticut colony. Wamsutta, whom the English named Alexander, agreed to adhere to the peace. So, all right, we're going to keep on being peaceful. Wamsutta, in order to make some money, didn't just deal primarily with the Plymouth colony. He started to sell Wampanoag lands to the Connecticut colony. That's the problem right there. He started to have economic relationships with other pilgrims, the other European, New England settlers, and when they wanted a monopoly on all the lands that he had had. His sale of Wampanoag lands to colonists other than those of the Plymouth colony brought the Wampanoag considerable power, but made the Plymouth colonists jealous. Massasoit Wamsutta began to form an alliance with Connecticut colony in response to increasing depredations into Pokanoket territory by the Massachusetts Bay colony. So he had a reason for dealing with the Connecticut colony. Massachusetts Bay colony kept on encroaching upon their lands. So if they tried to take their lands, then they would say, well, I'll just sell that land to the Connecticut colony. Now the Connecticut colony in Massachusetts has to sort of, battle it out who owns what land. In 1662, the English, the Plymouth colony, accused Wamsutta of independently negotiating land sales, and they arrested him at gunpoint, and then they imprisoned him for 3 days. So this is just, within a year or two after he became king, and then almost immediately after he appeared in front of the Plymouth court, in front of Josiah Winslow in 1662, Massasoit Wamsutta just died suddenly. He just died for some reason, right? Well, he just died for illness. We don't know why. Yeah, bullshit. He was poisoned. He was tortured to death. Y'all fucking done something. So he died of this weird illness, which they pretended like, oh, he just died after we arrested him. We put him in prison for 3 days. And once he's in prison, what's he eating? Probably the food that they're giving to him for 3 days. And then he gets in front of the Plymouth court, and then he's dead, right? So, what the fuck? That's clear. That's clear as mud right there. And I know exactly. Josiah Winslow fucking murdered Wamsutta. Josiah Winslow, fucking Harvard, Ivy League, wealthy, stuck-up aristocrat, the second generation. He didn't give a shit about Wamsutta. He just went ahead and, murdered him, got rid of him. And so that's, there's chapter 2, right? Now, chapter 3 of the Thanksgiving Indians, you have Metacomet. Metacomet comes up to power, and that was the second son of Massasoit. So Wamsutta's murder was one of the factors that would eventually lead to the 1675 King Philip's War, also known as Metacom's Rebellion. Wamsutta tortured or poisoned to death by Governor Josiah Winslow, who saw him as a threat. 13 years later, Metacomet becomes the chief. King Philip, the English arrested a bunch of Metacomet's men on some stupid charges. There was another trial, 12 Englishmen, 6 Christian praying Indians. one of the praying Indians are the ones who's going to eventually kill Metacomet. Remember that Massasoit, the first chief, would not, didn't want the Wampanoags to convert to Christianity, but they were able to get some of the Native Americans to convert. After this trial, they had like 6 men that they had charged. They hung them. They hung every single one of them, and supposedly for killing an interpreter. But it was the Wampanoag people's interpreter, so really it was just an excuse. It was the same reason for the Pequot War, right? There was somebody that had died. They wanted to blame somebody, so they said, fuck it, we want the Wampanoags' land. We don't like how cocky Wamsutta was. We've killed Wamsutta. Metacomet's going around being all cocky and shit, pretending that he's our friend. Now, Metacom is actually a genius. Metacom, he's also known as Metacomet and King Philip, but Metacomet wanted to have a general Indian war. So he was plotting against them. He wanted the Native Americans to unite to fight against the encroaching English. While there was that uneasy alliance in the very beginning, the English, 1623, the third year that they were there, they were killing people, putting people's heads on pikes, and then that bloodshed just kept on, continuing. It never stopped. So Philip called together a council of war on Mount Hope. Most Wampanoags wanted to follow him, with the exception of the Nauset on Cape Cod and the small groups on the offshore islands. Further allies were the Nipmucks, the Pocumtucks, and the Pinocooks. Eastern Abenakis. So Eastern Abenakis, Pinocooks, Nipmucks, Pocumtucks, they were all his allies. They were all totally for this general war. The Narragansett remained neutral at the beginning of the war, but eventually became allies. So the Pocumtuck, Nipmuc, not the Nauset, but the Wampanoags, the Pinocooks, Eastern Abenakis. From the further north, he had lots of allies, lots of people that was willing to join, in this general Indian war. Long story short, a war breaks out, a war happens, and they chase Metacomet down, and they kill him in the most brutal fashion. I mentioned some of this in the beginning, but Metacomet, they chopped off his head, they put it on a pike, they displayed his head in the middle of Plymouth Colony for 20 years, they chopped up his body, they quartered it, they spread it around on the trees, and they chopped off his right hand and give it to the guy who had shot him. So that's a great token, right, to carry away from war. Hey, I killed that man. Can I at least have his hand? And what are you going to do? Just set the hand in your teepee in your house and just watch as it rots, and then you got a bunch of bones? I don't know. It seems like a weird fucking trophy. But I guess if you're into murdering, then perhaps a piece, I don't know, I think like maybe a medal or something, or a lock of hair would be better than their fucking hand. But they chopped off his head, so he couldn't give the head to him. They chopped up his body, hung it in the tree, so maybe the hand was the only thing left as, a token of, hey, good job, look what you did. So that's the ending. That's the ending chapter for the Wampanoag people. There's still a few, remaining survivors today, and they try to sort of gather together what they got left. But, the Wampanoags had made this peace with the Pilgrims. They were political and military allies. They sold them the land or give them permission to live on the Patuxent lands. And in exchange for that, Thanksgiving feast, they brought 5 white-tailed deers. Eventually, they wipe them out. They kill every single one of them. The death of Philip, Metacomet, and most of their leaders, the Wampanoags, were nearly exterminated. Only about 400 survived the war. So there was, still a good handful of survivors. But this is, there was, 50,000 or so Wampanoags to begin with. Now you only got 400. You just got a handful. The Narragansett and Nipmuc suffered similar rates of losses, and many small tribes in southern New England were, for all intents and purposes, finished. So it wasn't the Wampanoag that nearly got exterminated. There were some that totally got weren't just endangered, but became extinct. They became extinct like the dinosaurs, like the dodo bird. They no longer exist. Not a single drop of their blood runs, amongst us today. They wiped them the fuck out. Wiped them the fuck out. So, in addition, many Wampanoag were sold into slavery. Male captives were generally sold to slave traders and transported to the West Indies, Bermuda, Virginia, or the Iberian Peninsula. So back to Portugal and Spain. Colonists used the women and children as slaves in New England. Of the Indians not sold into slavery, the colony forced them to move into Natik, Wamasit, Puckapoag, and Hassanamasit, 4 of the original 14 praying towns. These were the only ones to be resettled after the war. Overall, approximately 5,000 Native Americans, 40% of their population in 2,500 English colonies, 5% were killed in King Philip's War. By this time, the English population had increased so much, while significant, the losses were less important for their overall society. So Metacomet, they actually had a good, aggressive strategy, and they were tearing shit up in the very beginning, but ultimately Metacomet loses, and lots of small tribes are completely wiped out. There's only a handful of the Wampanoags that still live. After Metacomet was killed on June 29th, 1676, another day of Thanksgiving, just after the massacre, Mystic Massacre, there's a Thanksgiving declaration. They have another Thanksgiving declaration given. Edward Rawson unanimously voted by the council to declare Thanksgiving. The Holy God, having by a long and continual series of his afflictive dispensions in and by the present war with the heathen, natives of this land, written and brought to pass bitter things against his own covenant people in this wilderness, yet so that we evidently discern that in the midst of his judgments he hath remembered mercy, having remembered his footstool in the day of his sore displeasure against us for our sins, and many singular intimations of his fatherly compassion and regard, reserving many of our towns from desolation threatened and attempted by the enemy, right, savages, given us especially of late with many of our confederates many signal advantages against them, without such disadvantage to ourselves as formerly we have been sensible of it. If it be the Lord's mercy that we are not consumed, it certainly bespeaks our positive thankfulness when our enemies are in any measure disappointed or destroyed. And fearing the Lord should take notice under so many intimations of his returning mercy, we should be found an insensible people, as not standing before him with thanksgiving, as well as lading him with our complaints in the time of pressing afflictions. The council has thought meet to appoint and set apart the 29th day of this instant June as a day of solemn thanksgiving and praise to God for such his goodness and favor, many particulars of which mercy might be instanced, but we doubt not those who are sensible of God's afflictions have been as diligent to espy him returning to us, and that the Lord may behold us as a people offering praise and thereby glorifying him. The council doth commend it to the respective ministers, elders, and people of this jurisdiction solemnly and seriously to keep the same, beseeching that being persuaded by the mercies of God we may all, even this whole people, offer up our bodies and souls as a living and acceptable service unto God by Jesus Christ. So, happy Gain Stephen Day. This is what it's all about. Chapter 2, wiping out Wampanoag. Chapter 3, chopping up Metacomet and wiping out nearly all the Wampanoags and many of the smaller tribes. There were 2 other, I want to try to speak them by name. It was the Plymouth Colony, too, the Plymouth Court, and it was Josiah Winslow who had killed Wamsutta, but the Narragansett and Nipmuc. So the Nipmuc and the Narragansett, eventually Narragansett jumps on board, and the Nipmuc suffered similar rates of losses, and then a lot of small tribes exterminated, completely extinct. They don't live here today. So the last chapter, the ending chapter of Thanksgiving, everybody's dead. Everybody's fucking dead, and the leader's head is on a pike. So thank you, Chief Massasoit, for giving us Squanto and teaching us, the white people how to raise the crops and giving the land and having a military alliance. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you for, your kindness. And in exchange for that kindness and decency, you were a very civil culture, beautiful culture, one of the most civilized for 100 years. And in exchange for that decency and being civilized, your whole fucking family's, basically wiped out, and your tribe and your lands, your ancestral lands are gone. It's all fucking gone. So, happy Thanksgiving.